All right, so we have a great line of panelists, and we also prepare a lot of interesting questions, hopefully. So we'll just let the panelists answer our prepared questions first, and in the end, we have some time. We can let the audience also ask questions. All right, so I'll just start the first question. Do you think what is the future direction of the generalizable assembly system? Is it end-to-end or is it like modular?
Okay, yeah, end-to-end versus modular. I think Hui's work showed a pretty convincing case for making it modular, at least hierarchical. Maybe one day it'll be end-to-end, but ultimately I think one thing for this problem space is that we probably need to be governed by what do they actually want in the industry setting. That's kind of the real metric that we should care about. And I think in many of those settings, they definitely prioritize modularity and interpretability and debuggability and so on, and the ability to recompose components. So yeah, I think probably modularity for now. It would be just a very interesting academic challenge to make it end-to-end in the future.
I actually think that's very sensible. I think when we do end-to-end, if we ever do it, I think it's for the sake of research, not because we don't want a reasonable solution that we're aiming at. And if you also think about assembly and moving more into industry and structure setting, I think safety is also something very important. So modularity, explainability of how the model is making the reasoning is also going to be very important, especially as we move beyond like the pick and place, the basic insertions, and we go to something that is more complex. That's what's going on. So I would say also right now with the large models that we're having, there's still some modularity that I can think about how you structure some of the components. So we'll see how things evolve, but I would say end-to-end is probably more from an academic trying to understand things than just as we just said, right? So yeah.
Any different opinions?
I think we're in
I think I also agree, and I mean, I think in this assembly task, I mean, we've seen it in the last videos that it's like so complex. You have like a change of tools, like different components that you need to interact with. So I just think that if you unroll the whole sequence, and if you look at like all of the combinatorial combinations of like parts, tools, and also like end results that you want to have, I think like this combinatorial complexity is really, not going that well with end-to-end approaches. So therefore, I'm convinced that we definitely need some hierarchical structuring, such that we can also reuse skills effectively.
I'm actually thinking about more. I mean, for general assembly, I also kind of agree with the modular approach, but I also think about some special cases. For example, like the caching destination, we have this, fully kind of stacking or disassembly. I feel like this may have the potential to be like an end-to-end thing. Like, so what would be the benefit of it? Maybe you can comment more on it. Have you thought about this?
So we have very preliminary because this is only a brick one, which is very simple because we know it's brick. But if you look at the generalizing disassembly routines of buildings, if you look around to decompose what to do first, to make sense of the situation, but then to start to derive actions in I mean, I think disassembly and assembly in that sense are very similar because we have a set of actions to do in and I guess for these more complex problems that we may want to use LLMs in the end for a first instance of kind of description of a positive and potential positive, and then probably it needs to be combined with all of these other methods. But I think what is very nice to think about is generalizable, or what is generalizable in this large variety and complexity of tests. I think probably to think about that.
Cool. So shall we move on to the next question? Actually, it's a little bit related to the first question, but maybe let's just suppose we take the modular approach for now, and do you think data is still a bottleneck for us? If so, like, do we need to collect a really abundant, data for tackling this assembly problem, even though we are, looking at a modularized approach? And if so, if we need data, then what kind of data do we need, and how is the best, way to validate?
I think, yeah, data is going to be important. And I think in assembly, you're going to find that there is different classes, right? There is going to be cases where with very little data, you have the tools, you can just go ahead, solve the task, you're happy to go. But as you keep on adding complexity, then of course it's obvious, right? It's going to require more data. I think also thinking about the cases where simulation is not going to be good enough, right? I think right now simulation, we're making a lot of progress, and I was very surprised and very happy to see how much of the work today is really relying on simulation. But there's going to be things that are still coded in assembly that we cannot simulate so easily, right? I think cloning in the formable objects, but there is even more things that will take a lot of time. And I think NVIDIA has shown a lot of good work, but it didn't came for free, right? It took effort. So I think there is still a place where augmenting with real data will make a lot of sense. So again, we were talking before, combining sim and real effectively, especially for these cases where simulation will just be not enough, is like a very clear must.
I very much agree. I think data is still important and we need it. The modular approach or hierarchical approach will make our systems less data hungry. So, but it will not replace data. So definitely a lot of simulation, like Virgil said, to generate data, and that's very important. But then also to think about sort of different ways to reduce the need for data even more, for example, to reduce the skills in for different tasks, and that's also sort of where the modular approach comes in. You can reuse the low-level skills for different higher-level tasks.
Maybe I can ask a follow-up question to this as well. So, when I wanted to start a research about assembly, I will always think about what's the right approach that you take. Right? For example, learning the control part is, definitely challenging. But there's, two ways of doing it. One is using reinforcement learning, and the other is imitation learning. You kind of have to, own pros and cons. Right? Like, which way do you think is more, promising? And if there's a middle ground, make this problem, easier.
To come up with the conclusion.
I don't know.
Things are close to graduation.
So this is about reinforcement learning versus behavioral cloning, right? So actually, Nimrod is there, and we've been working a lot on these questions with Demostar, and I'm pointing at him because we usually have discussions about this, and also when sim is not good enough, or we should be adding real, and I think it boils down to the same thing. But as long as simulation is good, I think then reinforcement learning probably is the good way to go. But simulation, and that's something I remember that always, because he knows a lot about simulation, keeps reminding me, simulation is not going to be able to do everything. And then being able to add behavior cloning is going to be very important. And another thing that happened recently when I was having some discussion with people is that if you think about it, if you want to be very naive about the problem, if we have very good operation systems, we know how to do a lot of the tasks that we want to see in assembly. So there is also an argument to say, if we do get a really good operation systems and we know how to learn quickly from real data, that could really give us a lot of insights into how to solve things, even in assembly. So I don't think it's obvious which way we're going to go, but I would say it makes a lot of sense to invest in both of them.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Maria on this. I think that imitation learning has greatest value when you're in the bounds of what you can simulate. I think like the example of formable objects is a great one. It's very hard to set up scenes in simulation for formable objects that matches real world constraints. If you can collect data though, and use behavior cloning to learn a policy that way, seems like a very effective strategy. I also think that, yeah, there are definitely ways to combine both reinforcement learning and imitation learning. I think, ideally, collecting demonstrations would be very cheap. So this goes, back to what Maria was saying about the importance of good teleoperation systems, or demonstration collection systems in general. And I think, yeah, there are pretty convincing ways to combine imitation learning and reinforcement learning if you do have demonstrations. One approach that we took was, of course, something very simple, inspired by Jason Peng's deep mimic work, incorporating demonstrations into our reinforcement learning pipeline. I think the Google X and DeepMind work that I sort of mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I think that used DDPG from demonstrations, they incorporated demonstrations into their real-world RL pipeline. I think these are great ways to start with strong priors that you can get from collected demonstrations, and then gain a lot of added robustness via reinforcement learning, which I think is very nice for like the grander goal of robust and adaptive assembly.
And maybe I want to add two more thoughts. So I think for having like really generalizable agents, I mean, it would be amazing if we could just start from like a human doing the assembly actions that we want to automate, and then kind of like automatically generate the scene that we are considering, and maybe use this motion data as a prior to like start off our RL agents, but then of course still leverage simulation to make them more robust and make them recover from failures. And like following this idea, I mean, I've seen some works like this, but in simple environments, I think it would be also super cool to leverage like the data that you collect on the real system to like optimize your simulation and to tune the parameters of like the context and maybe the object properties. So I think the further we want to advance, I think it should be an interplay of the methods.
Also, maybe you can conclude her question.
Yes, so I want to ask a more higher level question. So today we see like assembly in two scales. One is industrial scale where you're trying to put in something like this, it's quite small, and the other is much bigger in the construction of architecture scale. I want to ask, what are the unique challenges of these two different scales, and how can we facilitate more exchange or like a shared venue where we can converge together, maybe leverage different benefits or different goals of these two aspects and come together so that we can have more joint efforts towards this.
But so we've been also doing some like a combination of the two, right, in our lab. Actually, it's not that different. So I would like to say probably the biggest difference is the robot form factor. The end effector is robust. Other than that, you can use almost the same policy, the same software to run on both sides. So yeah, I think nothing is preventing us from doing both things except for the hardware.
I think you agree.
No, I completely agree when I saw the flash sphere example. It's very, I wouldn't know other than the sphere factor. I think it may be very, like, let's say this timber assembly is very one specific construction technique, which is very specific to one case. Usually it's not just assembling, or there's a lot of gluing, application, drilling, hammering. I think the like assembly, as in the industrial term, seems to be much more very, yeah, exactly.
Maybe I think like one difference that like in construction, I think that maybe things are a bit more parallelized. So if we go towards like multi-robot scenarios, I think that that's something which you might encounter a bit more in construction sites compared to at least like nowadays, normal industrial automation, where it's still more like a sequencing of individual steps, whereas if you go on a construction site, I think, things are changing all around, which might maybe also make things like perception a bit more difficult because the world around you is changing more rapidly. But from a methods point of view, I think, we should definitely develop methods that can transfer from one domain to the other. And I also really hope that now with the hype in humanoid robotics that we can get hardware that can also be deployed in like both scenarios, because I find this so exciting about us humans. We can seamlessly do this very fine, precise insertion, and at the same point in time we can construct buildings on a very large scale, and we would have the robotic hardware that can also be used in both worlds. Maybe then we also realize that they have actually more in common than we think.
I actually feel like, sorry for interrupting, but I actually feel like this, that the construction and industrial assembly, this middle ground, is where we're moving towards everyday assembly. Because like in industrial assembly, you design a fixture system, you're trying to put something like this with one hand, right? But in reality, like what we are doing every single day, we use one hand, we put it together, and we rotate, we blast. Just like in the construction side, where everything is so messy, you still can focus what you're trying to do, use both of your hand. I guess this is where like fine manipulation and assembly and like RL, IL, everything comes together. I think it's a very promising direction.
Yeah, and in all of the assembly examples, I saw stationary setups, and you bring the robots to the robot, including construction skills, that maybe access the building with a mobile manipulator, and you kind of change the environment you want. Still, I have a feeling that the method probably still stays the same. It's just a bit,
Cool.
Sorry, can I follow up with another question? Today we see a lot of mentioning of these two keywords, assembly and disassembly. So we see assembly by disassembly strategy to find a sequence, assembly by disassembly to find this like last-inch trajectory to function RL. So I think there's a lot of like synergy between these two. And also, if you look at a child, how we learn about assembling stuff is about like just taking things apart, right? So maybe like I want to see your opinions on how can we push this further, like just beyond using this assembly to generate like maybe initial trajectory. How can we leverage this kind of almost like planning to play this idea further? Like just pushing, okay, how can we leverage assembly to inform disassembly better, or use disassembly to inform assembly?
Well, I want to just add, children, when children take things apart, usually they can't put them back together. but they do learn this physical interaction, that they learn some kind of inherent physics, right? Making space. So maybe that's something that we can do here, right? So when the robots try to disassemble something, maybe this contact physics it can run implicitly.
Maybe we can also consider like the different like levels or phases of the assembly or disassembly process. I think, like I would argue that when we assemble something, we are more going towards like sub-stages from where we know how to continue. And so maybe I think you want to add like another level of modularity. So maybe you want to remember like intermediate states from where you know how to continue. But yeah, I still think that the assembly by disassembly principle is like super powerful, because if you go like the forward process, what I also realized in my work is that it might often be the last step where you realize that your first step was the wrong one. And if you do like this approach from the other way around, you could not encounter this issue. And so I think this really makes it more and more effective, also like in this fast reward setting. Like if you start close to the door, you will not have this problem that you might never find that in the robot.
I want to go a bit the other way and be like, I think the assembly disassembly is nice and it will give us a lot of things going forward, But at the same time, I'm not sure 100% that this is the way we need to go going forward, or at least not the only one, right? Because two things. One of them is that the strategy that you may use for disassemble might not be the way you would actually want to assemble, and the other way around. So I think in many of the cases where we think that's very obvious, one way looks like the other, but that may not be the case. So by just looking at that setting, that can be very restrictive. The second one is that when you think that these two things can be equivalent, you're really thinking about the quasi-static setting, which means that there is no dynamic, so the way I do one thing can be reverted in time, and nothing happens, and that's perfectly fine. And I think that again, that is going to give us a lot of things to do just with this paradigm, but it's not going to scale to everything. And that's something to be really aware, I think, because we want to keep pushing the experiment. At least us in research, we are not in an industry. We don't need to bring things to the 99.999. We need to give industry the path to get data. So I think we need to go beyond some of the tasks, and that might require just putting the bit aside, assembling.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, just one very question about the so when it comes to contact with assembly, I understand that what we're trying to achieve is basically going to the realm of like what the human can do, right? Like assembling the motherboards and all this stuff is. And I want to remark on that I want to like set a lower bound basically on the tolerances that requires. So I think maybe we all agree is like let's say 10 microns or whatever. We can put some numbers, right? And I want to remark on that I feel that that number is not too much smaller than what the vision guided policies do without any complexes. So now the question is, so clearly we cannot do quantum assembly today, but then we ask ourselves, should we try to increase the performance of vision sensors to go to like lower scales, or should we try to go into this like new wild thing that we cannot simulate of tactile sensors and so on? So like, what do you think about this question of directions? That's what I'm doing.
I think we should go in both directions, right? And you know, media, they're working on better tactile simulations, and force is a little better than tactile, from my knowledge in simulation. So and so far, if we just learn from force feedback and with compliance, it works very well. And so, but it doesn't mean that, you know, since we have cameras, doesn't mean we should just, completely be in the dark and just use them. And if that higher resolution, usually a higher resolution images can give you a better accuracy in your policies, use them as reports.
I would like to just conclude that I think Tina has all the modalities, right? I mean, ideally, you can use them all to kind of push it in there.
We don't have utilized in our approach, right? So we have only fact that at this most.
Yeah, it's fine. But I think this is still pretty much, I think, unsolved questions for Tina as well, how to do this.
I mean, I think we should definitely use like vision and tactile, but I think like in some scenarios, I think you just cannot see the forces. Like, I mean, maybe there's also some non-ideality where you insert your part that is not measured a priori or something. And so I think vision alone, is not sufficient to observe all of the forces, and maybe the forces are a better and maybe more invariant signal to actually achieve like essentially insertion, screwing. So.
Okay. So due to time limit, I think we will have only last 2 or 3 questions. Okay. So do you have maybe a quick estimate of how close are we from, providing the industrial grade assembly as a public service, or this kind of adaptive thing, how far it can be realized? I feel like, for example, people are pretty optimistic about AGI and it's coming soon, but how about adaptive embodied assembly?
No, I don't like giving a number how many years it's going to happen. But I do think it's, so we're making a lot of progress, and both in academia and in industry. So in academia, I see more assembly, workshops like this happening in the lattice conferences. Also in industry, there's more of a sort of curiosity about can we do the learning approach, whereas before you almost never heard from industry that they actually wonder about this. But we still, I think we still have a long way to go. Currently we show 80% success rate. It's still pretty far from putting that actually into the practice.
If I may ask a follow-up question on that, like, do you think the structure that you showed, the hierarchical structure, like you have a depot of lower level skills and then there's a higher level one. Once you have that structure, you pretty much have the system, right? And do you think that is what you need? And that's the knowledge project.
I think it's a really good direction, and we would like to expand more. For example, generalizability, right? We want to generalize to a variety of objects and assemblies. And currently we still, we're pretty far from 100% success rate. So there's still quite a bit of work to do, both in terms of the low-level skills. The RL policies are not perfect, as well as the high-level policy where we learn from imitation and things can still go wrong, and pole designation is not perfect. So a lot of different pieces.
Sorry, we really don't have time to. Sorry, we need to move on. Sorry. Okay.
I can have one slide. So not on the timing, just to, I think to put this in perspective, we are making a lot of progress, but non-learning solutions are also making a lot of progress, right? And that's something to keep in mind of why maybe companies are not so willing to just go into RL, into real behavior cloning just in the zone. But at the same time, there's not really no point, right? So I think by now, if you go to industries, the person is to program the robot, I think now has better tools on how to say, I want this motion, maybe I can just make it go through time, they can optimize it here and there. So I think there's not going to be suddenly we came and we replaced everything that was there with our learning solutions. It's going to be more like the person that's actually coding the robot suddenly has an extra tool that maybe does something, like the blackboard, maybe some reinforcement learning, maybe some, or just like giving a demonstration with its own art. So there's going to be this increasingly more automated, more better solutions for integration. I think that's how we're going to see things converging. It's not going to be like, oh, here's my solution, just let's put it in, but more about tools for the people on the field, just getting better and better, and some of these components are going to come from learning.
Okay, great. So one last question. How do you envision foundation models impacting the value assembly? Do you think there could be a foundation model to solve everything end to end? Like, is there a possibility that a word model can, happen to kind of just modeling all this complex stuff? What's your opinion or estimation for this? I think Yash already talked a little bit about trying to have a
the end of the talk, right? Yep. Yeah, sure. I can elaborate on that a little bit more. I think what I would like to see happen, what I think is feasible, is kind of a single policy that can do specifically the insertion skill. So we can confine it to, let's say, top-down insertion for many different assets, many different assemblies. I think that's actually feasible. I think it's kind of inherited from the way that actually Dieter talks about things, Dieter Fox from NVIDIA, but he has kind of refers to these as foundation skills, right? So then you can kind of think about, for example, segmentation or the segment anything model as providing a foundation skill. And I think I'd like to see a foundation skill for low-level control for tasks like insertion. And that isn't going to solve the end-to-end problem, but I think coupled with foundation models that exist today, like LLMs for, let's say, doing some high-level planning, maybe VLMs for some degree of success detection, although I think we need to perhaps infuse those with knowledge of force or feel. I think that could be a pretty viable path forward. So some combination of foundation models that already exist that are provided by other communities, maybe some enhancement of those foundation models with additional quantities that matter for assembly, like force and touch. And finally, something that this particular community can develop from scratch, like a foundation model for, again, low-level control for something like top-down insertion. Yeah.
Oh, agree, right?
I think we're in agreement.
Okay. That's nice.
Okay, I can add something there, which is that I think there's still a lot of value in just having single policies, expert policies. I might be completely wrong, and I wish I'm very wrong on this, but I think foundational models will keep improving the capabilities, but I wonder if they will really be able to say, hey, I achieved this new level of dexterity with this foundational model that you could not do with an expert. That, I hope we can get to see that, but I haven't really seen it. I haven't seen foundational models doing like, whoa, that an expert policy will never do it. I still feel more the other way around, which is like, this expert policy is really good, and know now that this is going to foundational model, a definitional model is going to be able to do it very well. So I think the time when really the foundational model is like, wow, doing something that a single policy will not be able to do, I think then it will unblock something big. Until then, I think, yes, they can do a lot of things, but is it needed? You need that many billions of parameters for summing something, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for all the panelists. It's a great discussion, and thank you. So we are going to move to the final award and award and closing remark. And yeah, let's thank all the panelists.